Hello, everyone. Today we have Dr. Smalley from the English department. He will be talking to us about analytical writing.
Good evening. Good to see everybody here on our Zoom session. I might ask a few questions of the audience. So if so, feel free to offer any questions or feedback. But I understand that a lot of this is going to be delivered at a different time through video. And so hopefully this proves helpful to all of you. I wanted to share a bit about the analytical writing measure of the GRE and also try to provide some tips really for the test in general. The GRE is a test that produces a lot of anxiety sometimes, and I'm not always sure that it should. And especially this analytical writing measure seems to me to be something that stresses people out quite a bit. The GRE was a test that I spent a lot of time studying for, and so it's something that I'll speak to just a bit, although my situation may differ from yours. I took the GRE because I was pursuing a master's degree at the time in English, and I was fortunate enough to move through my master's degree quickly enough that I could use it when I reapplied to a number of schools for a PhD. One thing that I always like to say to folks is that preparing hard for this really matters. And so, but at the same time, it's really part of, for most college students, preparation is actually kind of relearning, right? Or rediscovering things that you already know. Like the math that's oftentimes really intimidating is not that hard. You probably did it in high school. You just need to go back to it and get a sense of what it was, and then you'll be fine. I'm gonna move through this talking about the analytical writing measure, giving you the basics. A lot of this information comes from the ETS website, which is a really valuable resource to you. So what is the analytical writing measure? What's involved with it? What do testers think that they're measuring in this sort of element of the exam? It tests critical thinking and analytical writing skills, which are hugely important in graduate school. It assesses the applicant's ability to, quote, articulate and support complex ideas, construct and evaluate arguments, and sustain a focused and coherent discussion. It involves two separately timed analytical writing tasks. 30 minutes of that are devoted to analyzing an issue, and we'll talk about that. And 30 minutes are devoted to analyzing an argument, which is a sort of separate section of this. And one of my goals for tonight is to kind of help us see the difference between those two aspects or facets of the analytical writing measure. And then this is a big deal for some people. It's written on a word processor, but that word processor does not include spelling or grammar checking. And that's something that you should just know going into it. And if those are areas where you sense that you might have some lingering weakness, it might be worth a little bit of work to figure out, like, is there a difference between a semicolon and a comma? The answer to that is yes, there is, right? And you should know that difference if you're going to use those punctuation marks. Because the people looking at this want to see, again, advanced writing skills, and you don't want to be making a lot of those kind of mistakes. Analytical writing. I've always thought this is interesting. One of the fields I studied required me to learn quite a bit of Greek before obviously I'm an English professor now, but I did some study that required some Greek training. And I think the word analysis is really interesting. It derives from two Greek words, ana and luo. The first word there, ana, means up or on, and the verb luo means break or loosen. And I think that's helpful, actually. So what you're really trying to do when you analyze something, I hope you think this is kind of cool, right? The goal is to break up the argument or issue into its constitutive parts in order to make a case about how the piece you're analyzing functions or what shapes the issue you're analyzing. You should aim to lead your readers through a careful examination of an issue or a discussion of an argument toward a reasoned judgment. It's best if you can articulate this final point, the reasoned judgment about the issue, as a really clear thesis statement. I hope that's helpful to you. It's always been as soon as I learned like the roots of this word, it really helped me understand the task of analysis being a task of breaking things up in order to understand. The first part that we're going to look at is the analyzing an issue section of the analytical writing measure. And here's what that aspect or facet of the exam involves. The analyze the issue task assesses your ability to think critically about a topic of general interest and to clearly express your thoughts about it in writing. Each issue or topic makes a claim that can be discussed from various perspectives and applied to many different situations or conditions. Your task is to present a compelling case for your own position on the issue. Okay. Let's really focus in on that last sentence. If you're watching along, and we have a handful of people in the class, but if you're watching along later, I would really encourage you to kind of jot that down if you're taking notes, that your task is to present a compelling case for your own position on the issue. How are you going to do that well? A number of comments that I've given you here, or tips that I've given you. First, you need to read the question and instructions carefully. You need to manage your time. There will be probably be a timer on the monitor. Oftentimes it's easy to get absorbed into the task of writing. And as you're kind of trying to make a point or working your way through this sort of carefully reasoned argument, you can lose track of time, which can be quite a big problem. You should be clear, assertive, and argumentative without coming across as bullheaded. What I mean by that is you don't want to sound like someone who's on a political talk show who cannot see two sides of an issue. But at the same time, you don't want to sound, and I'm saying this knowing I grew up in Kansas, as I'm guessing many of you did, or in the Midwest, just based on our average demographic of Fort Hays State. Midwesterners tend to be really, really humble and kind of hide behind little statements like, well, I might be wrong, but, or, you know, I'm only 21, so I'm not sure about this. And those sort of statements, I read them in papers pretty frequently, where it'll be these sort of hedges or these caveats in which the author is suggesting actually to the reader that maybe the reader shouldn't take the author seriously. You're aiming to be both serious, argumentative, and assertive without coming across as overbearing, again, like someone who's on like a political talk show. I would strongly encourage you to take some timed tests. You can get a sample of questions, put yourself on a stopwatch, work to see both sides of the issue, define terms, cut to the heart of the matter as soon as possible. So if you have 30 minutes to write about an issue, let's say related to pollution, is a sort of question that could probably pop up. You probably don't want to spend a lot of time warming up to that by telling a story, like a long-winded story about how much you really enjoyed playing in the forest as a kid or something like that. You want to cut immediately to the issue and establish yourself as someone capable of making and sustaining an argument. And this last point here, I think, is quite important based on how these essays are scored, is that you really want to use excellent transitions between paragraphs. I've done this talk for the Honor Society a few times, and one of the things that has come up that I just wanted to speak to is they probably will not be asking you any major hot button issues. Yes, they might ask you about pollution or the environment, but they're probably not going to ask you about issues like gun control, abortion, the sort of things where people tend to get really, really intensely exercised about a topic. That seems to me to be pretty unlikely to happen, and something that you probably shouldn't worry about too much. Okay, so analyzing the issue, you're going to look at an issue, provide a compelling case for your own position on the issue. The other, here's an example of that, and I'll read this to you. This is again from the ETS website. I thought it was a good example to offer you. Some people believe that government funding of the arts is necessary to ensure that arts can flourish and be available to all people. Others believe that government funding of the arts threatens the integrity of the arts. Your task, if you get this sort of prompt, would be to discuss which view more closely aligns with your own position and explain your reasoning for the position you take. In developing and supporting your position, you should address both of the views presented. Okay, well, what you need to know when you see a question like this is at first you might think like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't pay attention in my art history class, or like the ethics class that was at 9 in the morning, and I'm pretty sure we did talk about arts and government funding, but I can't remember, what we said. And the first thing I would say is like, don't panic, right? If you've made it to the point where you're taking this test, you can answer these sorts of questions. What's really important in this is, again, that you don't come across as dogmatic. You want to be able to present your topic or present your argument while at the same time addressing that opposing position and being able to sense that someone could reasonably disagree with you. And that's one of the things, and we'll look at the scoring guide a bit, but that's one of the things that the graders, they call them raters, I guess, not graders, right? Will be looking for. And here, again, you're going to take a position. The analyzing an argument is different. I thought I had a slide about that. I'm sorry, I don't. It's what you're going to get in the analyzing the argument is the argument itself, right? And then your task is not to make your own argument. It's to analyze an existing argument and kind of pick it apart, right? So the language of this is weird. I think this is the trickiest part of the whole session, right? When you're supposed to analyze an issue, what you're going to do is look at an issue like government funding of the arts and offer your own argument about that issue. When you get an argument, what you're going to do is start to kind of chip away at the argument, praise the strengths of the argument, and explain ways in which the argument could be strengthened. So here's a sample of that I think is pretty good. Arctic deer live on islands from Canada's Arctic regions. They search for food by moving over ice from island to island during the course of the year. Their habitat is limited to areas warm enough to sustain the plants on which they feed, and cold enough, at least some of the year, for the ice to cover the sea separating the islands, allowing deer to travel over it. Unfortunately, according to reports from local hunters, the deer populations are declining. Since these reports coincide with recent global warming trends that have caused the ice sea to melt, we can conclude that the purported decline in deer populations is the result of the deers being unable to follow their age-old migration patterns across the frozen sea. I am going to see, how many people do we have here? Sam, Haley, anyone want to chime in here with ways that we might begin to lose anything that we might want to say about this argument in ways that we could just kind of make a list of things that we could imagine developing some paragraphs about, or ways that we could engage this sample, and I don't know, explain the sort of evidence that would be needed to strengthen this, or ways that this argument would be weakened. Any comments on this? We'll just spend a moment here.
In
I
order to
do.
confirm, oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay, in order to confirm that it's that the deer populations are declining due to global warming, you would have to rule out the possibility of like disease or some predator, something like that as well.
Great. And so I would say that if I was writing this essay, one of the things I would consider doing is kind of making a note like disease or predation. Yeah. And you could imagine, instead of kind of lumping those into a sentence, how could you elaborate that a bit? Other things that we would look at here, I do think they kind of lace this with some potential ideas. Haley, those are good. Sam, what were you going to say? Or anything else you'd chip in?
I was just gonna say to look at where these reports are coming from, that they're coming from local hunters, and they may be an educated population, but they may not have specific records and data.
Yeah, and they might be horrible hunters, right? No, I'm joking, right? But I mean, that does seem kind of like that does seem almost to me like a way that the question is leading us, right? To get a sense that like that clause or phrase rather, according to reports from local hunters, like that really should raise an eyebrow, right? We're going to need a lot more data about the populations in decline. Is this representative of, I mean, are the hunters' sense, is that accurate? Has the population perhaps moved? What have National Forest Services said about this deer population? Any other things that we could think of that we would want to explore, or ways that you could imagine setting up some sort of study that would strengthen or weaken the argument? How could we make the argument stronger? Like what if maybe the hunters are right, and you know, it's obnoxious of me to suggest they're wrong. I mean, what if the claim here is right, that it is the result of global warming trends that has led to this problem? What might we be able to do to confirm that?
Maybe like set a table out saying like what global warming used to be in the population of deer, and comparing it to the global warming that we're in now and the population of deer.
Sure. We could also do, I think, like a set of studies around the specific areas, right? It seems like what's happening here is a speculation based on a perceived decline in the population, but it doesn't seem like we have actual data or observation of what's happening. And we know, of course, that, you know, from all those truly, you know, heartrending videos of animals that depend on patterns in Arctic environments, whether that's polar bears or whales, we have seen that sort of footage from really close quarters research, right? So you could imagine a paragraph in which, after raising all the things that you've mentioned, we could also talk about like the possibility of assigning a research team to the region that will be doing kind of on the ground work. I hope that's helpful to you. And I hope it's helpful to you to really think about the distinction between issue, right, in which you're going to weigh in and take a stance. And here, it's almost like you're playing the role of teacher or professor, in which what you're going to do is kind of like, you know, if this came across my desk as a teacher, I'd say like, well, this person understands commas, but I don't think they understand scientific research, and I'm not a scientist, right? But you can read it and get a sense for what's flawed. By pointing that out, you know, and by pointing that out in writing, part of what you're demonstrating is your ability to take on that sort of role, which is a kind of intellectual leadership role that search committees, or I'm sorry, admissions committees will be really interested in seeing you demonstrate. Good. Couple other things here. Analyzing the argument, we've already gone over this a bit. The analyzing the argument task assesses your ability to understand, analyze, and evaluate arguments according to specific instructions and to convey your evaluation clearly in your writing. Each topic consists of a brief passage in which the author makes a case for some course of action or interpretation of events by presenting claims backed by reasons and evidence. Your task is to discuss the logical soundness of the author's case by critically examining the line of reasoning and the use of evidence. Same as above in terms of analyzing an issue, but with this distinction. You're really much more interested in critiquing or praising the soundness of an existing argument. It seems to me that the issue essay asks you to make an argument, and the argument essay is more about logic and critiquing an existing argument. And sometimes I will say this, I've talked to a number of people who've taken the test, and you can just get kind of lucky, right? Maybe that's not luck. Maybe it's preparedness of some sort. But I know of at least 2 people who took the test, and the question that they got on this was like, oh man, I took a class about government, where we spent a week talking about government funding of the arts. And if so, that's like your time to show off and really pitch yourself through the exam to admissions committees. I have provided Luz and Sam with a set of handouts. And I don't want to belabor this too long, but I thought it would be really helpful to you to look at some essays. And if you're watching this on your own time, this would be a fine time to kind of pause. I'll go over this very briefly. If we were having a normal semester, which I wish, like all of you, I'm sure, I wish we were, we'd be doing this in class and spending a lot of time kind of unpacking this. But given the situation, it seems best to kind of move through this somewhat quickly. But I kind of culled the ETS website for data and samples and tried to put them into readily accessible documents for you. And one thing that seemed really helpful to me is to pull out the scoring guide. If you have that and want to pull it up, I'll just briefly talk about a few elements there. And then I would like to look at a couple of the sample essays, although we won't read them all just because that would be tedious beyond compare. But the scoring guide you get is that these essays are graded with scores of 6 through 1, with 6 being the highest. So a student who's absolutely crushing this, or a test taker who's absolutely crushing this essay, is getting 6s. What's involved there? According to the scoring guide, a typical response in this category articulates a clear and insightful position on the issue in accordance with the assigned task, develops a position fully with compelling reasons and persuasive examples. It sustains a well-focused, well-organized analysis, connecting ideas logically, conveys ideas fluently and precisely using effective vocabulary and sentence variety, and it demonstrates superior facility with the conventions of standard written English. So those are things like grammar, usage, and mechanics, and it might have minor errors. I mean, the raters know that you're working on something without a word processor. So if you spell something wrong here or there, it's not going to tank your grade. We'll look at a few examples, or your score, I should say. We'll look at a few examples of really low-end scores, and you'll see the sort of grammatical or language errors or mechanical errors that are the kind of things that are really going to pull a grade down. One of the things that I would point out there is that you have to kind of think about the kind of grading or rating that these people are doing. I've not been a rater for ETS. It's something I've very little interest in doing. But if you're reading through pages of these kind of essays, the essays that are going to be by far the most impressive to you are the ones that are the most clear, right? I think that spending a lot of time thinking about organization, and it's that third bullet point, right? Focused, organized analysis that connects ideas logically. That seems to me to be a spot where, as a writer, I would really try to think about like, what is the outline of this essay? And that's hard to do in 30 minutes, right? But use really solid topic sentences, using a sort of sequential ordering, perhaps, where it's like, the first thing I would say about this author's claim, linking climate change to or purported decline in the Arctic deer population is X, right? The second thing, right, like that sort of sequence becomes really, really valuable rhetorically for your reader. If you look down the list, you can kind of, and again, I'm not going to read all these because it would just be way too much, right? But let's look at score 3, right? And score 3 is one of the spots where, if you look at that list, like 6, 5, and 4 are, you get kind of a list of all the good things at varying levels that the essay is doing. Score 3 is considered limited, 4 is adequate, 3 is limited. And when you're in that score 3 category, one of 5 things is happening that becomes pretty problematic. It's vague or limited in addressing the specific task directions and presenting or developed position on the issue, or both. It's weak in the use of relevant reasons or examples, or relies largely on unsupported claims. It's limited in focus and or organization. It has problems in language and sentence structure that result in a lack of clarity. And it contains occasional major errors or frequent minor errors in grammar, usage, or mechanics that can interfere with meaning. I want to point out that one of those things is what moves this into that category 3, right? If you're doing all 5 of those things, you're moving into like the 1 category. So 3 is really where they start tallying like pretty significant writing errors. Let's take a second to look, if you will, and again, I'm not going to read this, but I do want to see, I do want you to see examples of what a strong response looks like. To me, this is the most helpful way of getting a sense of this assignment or this aspect of the exam, is thinking about really specific examples. Writing is almost impossible to teach in the abstract. We need models. We need to work with these things with our hands in an important way. So go to the issue prompt here. This is on, I guess, page 2. The issue prompt is this: as people rely more and more on technology to solve problems, the ability of humans to think for themselves will surely deteriorate. Discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with the statement, and explain your reasoning for the position you take. In developing and supporting your position, you should consider ways in which the statement might or might not hold true, and explain how these considerations shape your position. So again, we're working with the issue here, and because it's an issue, you as the writer are being asked to advance an argument about whether the increase in technology, right, will lead to the deterioration of humans' ability to think for themselves. Here's what a 6 looks like, and I'll just read the first paragraph to give you kind of a sense. The statement linking technology negatively with free thinking plays on recent human experience over the past century. Surely there has been no time in history where the lived lives of people have changed more dramatically. A quick reflection on a typical day reveals how technology has revolutionized the world. Most people commute to work in an automobile that runs on an internal combustion engine. During the workday, chances are high that the employee will interact with a computer that processes information on silicone bridges that are 0.09 microns wide. This person is showing off, right? Like they have, and you could too, right? You don't need to know like the width of a silicon bridge, right? But there's probably some like sort of data about technology that you know that you could deploy in a way that's similar to what this author is doing here. And I want you to see like how clever that is, right? I mean, it looks like the sort of thing that you get from a research paper, but this person is able to draw on something they know. And like, that's the sort of strategic, brilliant move that you would like to try and make. Upon leaving home, family members will be reached through wireless networks that utilize satellites orbiting the Earth. Each of these common occurrences could have been inconceivable at the turn of the 19th century. But then look with me, I'm going to go on with this because I think it's worth it. Then look with me at least the next 2 paragraphs, okay? That's kind of an introduction, right? In which the author displays his or her chops with standard academic English. Paragraph 2, right? The statement attempts to bridge these dramatic changes to a reduction in the ability for humans to think for themselves. The assumption is that an increased reliance on technology negates the need for people to think creatively to solve previous quandaries. Looking back at the introduction, one could argue that without a car, computer, or mobile phone, the hypothetical worker would need to find alternate means of transport, information processing, and communication. Technology short circuits this thinking by making the problems obsolete. However, this reliance, and that's just, I'm sure you learned this in English 101. I teach it to my students in English 101 and 102, the way that, however, oftentimes works as a really strong transition statement because it puts tension into a sentence. Words like however, although, consequently, subsequently, these are the sort of words that perform the sort of logical bridges in an argument. However, this reliance on technology does not necessarily preclude the creativity that marks the human species. The prior examples reveal that technology allows for convenience. The car, computer, and phone all release additional time for people to live more efficiently. This efficiency does not preclude the need for humans to think for themselves. In fact, technology frees humanity to not only tackle new problems, but may itself create new issues that did not exist without technology. I won't keep reading this, but what I want you to see here is the way that that statement, like the way that this author sets this up, is really, really thoughtful. It acknowledges the ways that technology has been really convenient for our lives, but at the same time acknowledges the sincere question of whether an over-reliance on technology does create sort of problems. I mean, there's a sense in which that's potentially real, right? And even if, and I would say this, right, that even if you're the sort of person who maybe you are working on a job that's heavily tech reliant, and you can't imagine anyone saying that, you know, the proliferation of technologies deteriorates, how do they say it, right? Deteriorates humans' ability to think for themselves, right? If you hear that and think like, wow, that seems like, you know, a conspiracy theory sort of crazy thing, and maybe that's how you would typically respond. This is a moment to perform differently, and to perform in this sort of balanced, thoughtful manner that you see in this score that's a 6. Let's look just briefly at the rater comments for that essay response as well. And you can almost like take the language of the rater commentary, the way that they write up their response, and map it perfectly back on to the scoring guide at the beginning, right? The author of this essay stakes out a clear and insightful position on the issue and follows the specific instructions by presenting reasons to support that position. I mean, that's literally, right, like the opening of a 6 score. The essay cogently argues that technology does not decrease our ability to think for ourselves, but merely provides additional time for people to live more efficiently. In fact, the problems that have developed alongside the growth of technology actually call for more creative thinking, not less. Let's look at this score 5. I also want to show you a score 2 and a score 1, again, just very briefly, because I think that those will help kind of calm anxieties. I think the 5 is kind of a funny example. It's a great score. So same question, here's what a 5 response looks like. Surely many of us have expressed the following sentiment or some variation of it during our daily commutes to work. People are getting so stupid these days. Surrounded as we are by striding and strident automatons with cell phones glued to their ears, PDAs gripped in their palms, and omniscient, omnipresent CNN gleaming in their eyeballs, it's tempting to believe that technology has isolated and infantilized us, essentially transforming us into dependent conformist morons best equipped to sideswipe one another in our SUVs. This should be making you feel better, right? Like that's a 5. Like this person uses a lot of kind of flowery, dramatic language. I mean, which is kind of tricky to know what to do with that, right? Like it's kind of clever that they say just like striding and strident, but it also sounds a little bit like they're writing in, I don't know, like the 19th century for a newspaper in Brooklyn or something, that it's a little weird for an academic essay, right? As is the phrase like dependent conformist morons, best equipped to sideswipe, actually, there's a typo there, one another in our SUVs. Furthermore, hanging around with the younger pre-commute generation, whom tech savviness seems to have rendered lethal, is even less reassuring, with, quote, teen people style trends shooting through the air from tiger-striped PDA to tiger-striped PDA, and with the latest starlet gossip zipping from juicy BlackBerry to teeny turbocharged cell phone, technology seems to support young people's worst tendencies to follow the crowd. Indeed, they have seemingly evolved into intergalactic conformity police. After all, today's tech-aided teens are courtesy of authentic hands-on video games literally trained to kill. Courtesy of chat and instant text messages, they have their own language. They even have tiny cameras to efficiently photo document your fashion blunders. Is this adolescence or paparazzi terrorist training camp? Well, that's kind of a mess, right? Yet the author seems to be having quite a bit of fun and seems to manage language, like the conventions of grammar pretty well. And they do go on to make an argument that's strong without being nearly as insightful as that 6 level example. And here's what the rater says. The language of this essay clearly illustrates both its strengths and weaknesses. The flowery and sometimes uncannily keen descriptions are often used to powerful effect, but other times the writing is awkward and comparison somewhat strained, right? There's consistent evidence of facility with syntax and complex vocabulary. However, such lucid prose is sometimes countered by an over-reliance on abstractions and reasoning that's not entirely effective. I think that to me, and when I taught this last year to a much larger group, many students found that 5 example to be pretty comforting as an example of a very, very reachable and very high score. Let me just show you the first paragraph of a 2 and then a 1, and then I'll say a few comments about this and then we'll get out of here. In the sheet with a 2, I think that what we're seeing is clearly like a much, much weaker kind of paper, which it says in recent centuries, humans have developed the technology very rapidly, and you may accept some merit of it, and you may see a distortion in society occurred by it. To be lazy for human in some meaning is one of the fashion issues in these days. There are many symptoms and reasons of it. However, I cannot agree with the statement that the technology make humans to be reluctant to thinking thoroughly. It's a pretty messy first paragraph, right? There's clearly an effort here. It looks to me like this is a writer really struggling with language. I would probably guess that this is a scholar for whom English is a second or third language, and perhaps I often think this when I'm grading essays is perhaps this would look very, very different if someone was writing in their first language, but there is a sense in which graduate school is trying to figure out, right, like, is this person ready for graduate study in English? And right here we aren't really seeing that. Essay 1, you can just kind of flip it over, right, and it's 1 sentence long. and that's not going to do anyone any good. I hope that's helpful. I don't want to spend much time on it because I know it's kind of tedious, but to me, this is the most helpful way to kind of get oriented towards the exam. I want to give you some general advice, and then we'll get out of here. I'll field any questions that people have. And if you're watching this video and have a question, feel free to email me. I'm easy to find and happy to send you an email back. Here's some general advice about the GRE. First, I would encourage you to spend some time and money to prepare well. If you take some sort of prep course, if you can, I'd really strongly recommend it. I don't know how things like Kaplan and Princeton Review are negotiating the COVID crisis. I would suspect that they're having lots of Zoom classes, and you might even be able to get one at a discount. You can get books and study resources, and those are pretty helpful. But the nice thing about taking one of those GRE prep courses is they'll really force you to take lots of exams and learn how to kind of navigate the exam, because part of it's just kind of a trick. I'm not a very good test taker. So for me, I found this actually very, very helpful. Though they can be a little bit expensive to take those exams, I'll just read it. I know they're expensive, but strong scores can help you get into programs that have good funding. If at all possible, you don't want to pay graduate school tuition. So sometimes I kind of think of that kind of payment as an investment, that maybe a high GRE score will help get you more scholarship money for graduate school. The second thing I would say is, and this is easy, it just takes work, right, is to develop an insane vocabulary before you take the test. There will be questions that will ask you to use words that you don't typically use. There are lists of top GRE words available. And you should be able to define each word really, really quickly and accurately before you sit down to start the test. For me, this was hugely important. I understand the test has changed a little bit from when I took it a number of years ago, but I do know that there's still some portions where one of the things, honestly, that's being tested is your ability to make analogies using words that are probably unfamiliar to you. So I think that's a great thing to do. And then I would say this is really important. Don't ignore preparing for the portion of the exam that seems less directly related to your discipline, because it's a chance to shine, right? What I mean is this. For example, if you're going into a humanities program, like let's say you're applying to a MA program in history, and for that reason, you know that what you're going to be doing in a history program is like the wonderful stuff you love, right? Like reading or, primary texts and reading brilliant analyses of those texts and having conversations with professors and colleagues and writing rich, thoughtful, engaging, like 15 and 25-page papers about like your favorite intellectual field, right? And that's like, it's pure, like it's hard, but at a deep level, it's like intellectual joy for you to do that stuff. And here's one great thing about being doing a master's in history, maybe for you, is you don't have to ever do any math, right? And if that's the situation, it gets really, really, really easy for you to just say like, hey, because I'm a history scholar, I'm not going to work on math. But think about it this way, right? If you, let's say you do really well on the language portion, and someone else who's competing for the same spot in graduate school also does well on the language portion, you have like similar scores, but your math score is like low and theirs is really high and other things are equal, people are impressed by people who can do like math pretty well. And the math here is not that hard, right? Like if you spend time prepping for the math, right? Even if you're a history graduate student or applicant to graduate school in the field of history, you can really shine and look pretty bright. And here's the last thing I'm going to say about this thing, and then I'll field any questions people have. Again, you can email me if you want to. Is that the analytical writing measure is probably the least important section of the test because at some level it's such an odd, atypical writing experience. The truth of the matter is that in graduate school, you will never sit down have a surprise topic, and 30 minutes to write on it. It never happens, right? You instead, like if you're that history major, you're working on your final paper, if you're a good student, for the last 2.5 months of the semester. And you have a word processor, and you have people you can talk to, and you have a library. And the graduate admissions committees are going to be much, much, much more interested in your writing sample and your personal statement, which are required by many graduate programs. And those will be much more important to the admissions committee. When I took the GRE, I did better on the GRE than anyone I'd talked to about it. I'm not saying that as a brag. It just is the case, right? And I studied really, really hard and crushed it, except for the writing section. When I was taking the writing section, which was a bit different than it is now, but it had a lot of similarities, I was writing an essay and cruising along, and all of a sudden my screen went blank and I didn't know what happened. And about 3 seconds later, a window popped up that said, your time has expired. Your essay is submitted. Please move on to the next section of the essay or the next section of the exam. And that was it, right? Like there's no going back. There's no like raising your hand and saying like, hey, I didn't know time was about to run out. I just lost track of time, right? I crushed the language section. It used to be divided into like language, math, and then writing, right? I crushed the language section. I crushed the math section, and my writing was like pretty average because I didn't have a concluding paragraph, right? But I had strong writing samples. My personal statement was strong. And so that ended up not being a huge barrier. I hope some of this has been helpful. I know it's a little bit odd and I wish we could be all together in person. Is anyone here have any questions? And if not, feel free to email me. Sam, Luz, Haley, any questions about any of this stuff?
I got
just to clarify, so sorry.
No, you're good. Go ahead. Haley.
Just to clarify, the analytical writing score is different from, like, it's completely separate from the quantitative and qualitative scores.
Is that a question or is that a comment?
It's a clarification.
I think it is, right?
Okay.
I'm happy to provide that information. Luz, maybe you can look that up and put that like a comment there. I'm not positive on that, but that's my sense, Haley.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you.
And again, like I said, it's my sense it's not something to stress about, you know? I mean, it's something to work on, but like if you're going to into any field where writing is going to be like a huge part of what you do, like history or English or psychology or any of those humanities, like you're going to go into philosophy. I think that that's a really, I think the writing sample and your personal statement, if you're applying to graduate school, those are common documents, and those are the ones that the admissions committees will pore over. Haley, are you applying to graduate school soon or taking this test?
I am. I'll be taking the test the second week of November,
okay.
And applications are due this winter.
Okay, and what field are you applying for?
I'm applying for international security.
Okay, so I'd guess there's a lot of writing there. I don't know a ton about international security, but I'd guess there'd be some, and this can be a spot where you can show off a little bit, but it's not my sense that a slightly weaker score is nearly as important as you might think it is, just because you have so many other ways that you can demonstrate who you really are as a writer, as opposed to like, here's who I am as a writer in this bizarre setting, so. Any other questions?
I do not have any questions.
That's great.
Me neither.
Cool.
Same here.
Well, I hope this is helpful. I know it's a little strange, right? I mean, we just kind of have to do the best we can during these times. And, if you want to share this PowerPoint, Luz, let me know and I can email it to you. I have no problem with, people taking a look at it. So.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for presenting to us.
Okay. I hope that was helpful. I don't know. Is this what you wanted mostly? Is this kind of, it's a little hard to do without like a real audience, right? So, okay, good enough, right? All right, good deal. All right, thanks guys, appreciate y'all.
So much. Have a good
Thank
night.
you.
All right, take it easy, bye.
Bye.